Hello, hello, hello. Today we're going to have a look at a game that was played very recently in the German Bundesliga. It just started on this weekend, the last weekend, and this is a game between two not very well-known players. We have Markus Lammers with the white pieces. His rating is about 2308, and we have Christian Braun. His rating is 2369. And these two players, I believe they are both IAMs. They're not very famous, but they produced a very interesting battle, and this is the reason why I chose this one to start the channel with. So that game started with the move knight to f3, and after knight f6, c4, g6, d4, bishop g7, and knight c3, d5, black chose the very solid Grunfeld defense. To that one, white also chose a very solid approach. He played the move e3, and he defended the pawn on c4. This is one of the ways to deal with the Grunfeld, avoiding the forcing lines and trying to get a position which is a typical one and which you understand well. So basically what happens after short castle, bishop e2, c5, short castle for white, cd4, ed4, and knight c6 is a position that you can get from many openings. To start with, you can get this one from the symmetrical English. If you go on the first move c4 and black goes c5, knight f3, knight f6, and let's say here on d4, if black decides not to take on d4 himself, but if he goes g6, then after e3, bishop g7, knight c3, capture. This is one way of reaching the C position that we have just seen. Surprisingly, you can get this one from the move e4 on the first one, and you can get the same position in the Caracan in the pan of attack after the trade on d5, c4, knight f6, knight c3, g6, knight f3, bishop g7, bishop e2. So we have exactly the same position. And we can say that this is quite an important position then in that case, if we can get it from so many openings, and indeed it is, as what will happen afterwards is a typical situation in which these two pawns will disappear and white is going to get an isolated pawn on d4. If you want to be a good player, you definitely need to understand these positions. They're extremely common, and you can get them literally from almost every opening. So white's choice in this game was the move rook e1, which is not the only thing that he can go for. The Grunfeld players are not particularly intimidated by this line. In fact, they like to play against this line, and they have a very good score. Let's have a look at some other options for white. Bishop g5 is one idea to play actively and to put some pressure on the pawn on d5 by doing so, as now there is the threat of taking on f6 and eventually taking on d5. To that one, black can reply with the capture on c4, and after bishop c4, there is an additional resource, bishop to g4, pinning this knight on f3 and putting a lot of pressure on the pawn on d4 in return. Well, also another move then for white is h3, which makes a lot of sense. Now h3 has taken away the g4 square from the black bishop, and white hopes to somehow make use of his space advantage, but in that case black can also nicely develop his pieces with bishop f5, and after bishop e3 the capture on c4 followed by say rook c8 is providing the typical play against the isolated pawn on d4. So rook d8 is coming next, and black is having some pressure against that pawn. Other choice for white on move number 9 is to jump directly with the knight on e5, but if this forcing line was working, then everybody would be playing like that with the white pieces. Well, black can simply capture on c4, and after the capture on c6, he is reinforcing this control on the d5 square that he usually wants to have in these positions, and after bishop c4, queen d6, he is once again doing perfectly fine. And one more idea for white is to play c5 and to grab some space, eventually to safeguard this pawn. But then after bishop g4, black intends knight e4 to open up the bishop and to put pressure against that pawn on d4 again. That's another typical thing that you will see in the Grunfeld, the pressure against the pawn on d4. But you will also see it in a cousin of the Grunfeld. This is the Alekhine defense, cousin by spirit, not by really move orders or anything like that. The spirit is the same. You want to give up the center, but after that you want to start attacking it, start counter-attacking it, and this is what we see here too. So rook e1, that's a nice move. The rook is operating on the half-open file, and this is one of the reasons why people like to isolate their pawns. Whenever they isolate a pawn, they get a couple of half-open or open files on which they can put their rooks on, and a couple of nice squares where they can eventually post their knights. On rook e1, black took on c4, and he got what he wanted to, this isolated pawn on d4, which he immediately pressurizes with the move bishop g4. Note that this is not the only move that he has. He can also go b6, and after bishop g5, fianchetto the bishop. This is very sensible, as well as here the bishop is very, very active on the long diagonal, and it also controls the critical d5 square in front of the pawn. The game Gerviadze against Ivanchuk continued to e3, and after h6, bishop f4, and e6, Ivanchuk got a very pleasant game, and it was played back in 1986, this game. But there is nothing wrong with the move bishop g4. Now immediately the pawn is endangered, so it has to go up on d5, and then already black has a nice choice of what to do. In the game he decided to go knight a5, but I think that bishop f3 might be a little bit, might be in fact simpler. Bishop takes f3, and if queen f3, knight e4 with the idea knight f5. So in comparison to the game, this knight is going directly to d6 rather than on a5. And this is indeed something that you can do as well. Maybe it's a better way to set your pieces up. I forgot to mention that in this situation, what we have right now is sort of reversed Tarrasch defense. It's just like black has played with the white pieces, and he has fianchetto his bishop, and white has chosen the Tarrasch defense, and then now he has the isolated pawn on d5. True, white has an extra tempo, but that's not so significant here. At least seemingly it's not so significant. Then knight a5 played in the game, and here white decided to drop the bishop back on e2. He could have dropped it on f1 as well, but well, in that case it seems like black is doing fine. After rook c8 on an h3, he can grab on f3, followed by knight c4, put some pressure on the queen side, and he's doing quite okay in the game. Casted against Khairulin, which was played in Skopje 2015, the European Championship. The bishop on e2 wants to grab back white wants to grab back with the bishop so that he has some extra control of the d5 square, and he did so after rook c8, h3, bishop f3, and bishop takes f3. So right now black can claim that he is okay, and I would totally agree with him, as he managed to trade a pair of light pieces and he managed to block that pawn. But I would also totally agree that he has to be very, very careful. And this move that he played looks fine, knight c4, gaining some extra control on that square in front of the pawn, but also moving the knight away from the dangerous position on e5. White replied to that one with queen b3. He needs to play as actively as possible. Whenever you have an isolated pawn, you want to be as active as you can, because in the possible endgame, the isolani can become a very, very bad thing. Right now, however, it controls a lot of squares, and it has a lot of energy inside. So if I have to paraphrase Nimzowitsch, this is almost a pass pawn, and we know that the passers, according to Nimzowitsch, are very dangerous criminals. You will see that this criminal was really very, very dangerous in the game in a moment, because black didn't put him into prison. Speaking about prison, it makes sense now to try and to block this pawn as quick as possible. So one idea was to play knight s6, and that's definitely an interesting move, and black could and probably should have done it in this game. But I also like the idea of jumping with the knight on d7. Regrouping his forces in a really nice way. The knight will come on c5 eventually, and or on e5. And taking the pawn on b7 seems too risky in this situation. One possible line is, well, rook b8 is a possible move, but also knight c5 is a possible move in this situation. And even the capture on b2 is a possibility, so that after bishop b2, bishop takes, and rook takes. Black temporarily regains the pawn, and next he will have compensation thanks to the fact that this bishop is a bad piece. Although, of course, this is not the most optimal thing. I suspect that in case of queen b7, knight e5 or knight c5 are definitely better moves. But black played the move queen d7, which also makes a lot of sense. He is defending b7, he is connecting the rooks, and here white played the novelty rook e2. Previously bishop e2 has been played, and white got some edge after knight e6, bishop e3, starting to bug the queen side. This makes a lot of sense, by the way. So not only developing the bishop, but creating some weaknesses on the queen side. And after a6, rook d1, b5 was a little bit premature, and white managed to take the advantage with the move e4, because after the capture he has this idea of jumping with the knight to b4 and eventually to c6. So here we see a very good case of white having making use of the weakness on c6 of the outpost that the Isolani has provided to him. However, rook e2 played in the game also makes a lot of sense, and definitely should give more or less normal game for either of the players. But still, I find it very surprising that this game lasted just 5 more moves, amazingly. When I first looked at this position, I thought, okay, black can never lose this. He is so solid. All he needs to do is just to put the knight on d6 and nobody can do anything to him. Of course, things are not as simple as we have seen in the previous line. White is going to play bishop e3, attack on e7 eventually, or double the rooks, attack on e7. But look, the pawn on e7 is easily defendable. It's deep in your camp. The one on e7 is also easily defendable. Yeah, we can do either e6 or b6. In either case, that would be a possibility. The only problem for black at the moment, as far as I can see, is the fact that he cannot really easily maneuver with his pieces. So I think that he was already regretting a bit that he put the queen on d7. As now, one idea that looks very interesting is knight e8, and eventually he wants to jump knight e6 and knight e5, and probably this is the best thing that he can do. But maybe he was kind of afraid of this bishop g4 idea, where his queen and his rook are on the same diagonal, and pushing the pawn like that on f5 is not everyone's cup of tea. Not everybody likes to weaken himself like that. Or maybe he was afraid that after knight e8 there will be bishop g5, and on knight e5, bishop e4 and knight e6. Maybe he didn't like this position, although I don't really see why wouldn't he like it. This is the best thing that black can do, in my opinion, and he would be doing perfectly fine. But in the game he played another reasonable move, rook e8. He overprotected the pawn on e7 as he was anticipating the doubling of the rooks on the e file. And after bishop g5 he made another natural move. He said to himself, okay, my opponent wants to come rook e1. This is very obvious, and after that I will have some difficulties with the pawn on e7, and most likely I will also have difficulties with some other things. For example, bishop f6 and bishop g4 is always an idea, and my two heavy pieces on the long diagonal might get into danger. So he decided to clarify matters, and he played queen f5, putting pressure on his bishop. And he thought that he's clearing all the problems by going queen f5. And he apparently believed that after this bishop is traded, he would be having a very nice blockade, and eventually very nice play on this long diagonal. But he missed that there is this criminal on d5, and this criminal is closing too many of the squares that white wants to use. Plus, he missed that there is still this problem on this diagonal. Oh, he kind of forgot. I'm not sure what exactly happened. He definitely had to play knight e6, and to make sure that the bishops are blocked, and after rook e1 to play this position, no matter how passive it is very solid, and it will be very difficult for white to do much. But queen f5 all of a sudden lost the game, as white surprisingly took on f6. And this is something that many people miss in situations like that. They think, okay, the opponent has a bishop pair and this is his main advantage. But people do forget that bishops, one of the main advantages of the bishops is that they can be always traded for a knight. almost always traded for a knight. They're so powerful, so quick, and so good. And they're flexible. This is one of the things that we are talking about. Whenever the bishops are flexible, he takes, and next we can make another move. And here after bishop f6, the threat is bishop g4. Look at this one. Look how badly it looks for black. And if he takes on f6 with the bishop, there is bishop g4. He is dropping the exchange at least. And if he takes on f6 with the pawn, it's going to be even worse for black, as he's dropping the knight on c4. The black pieces became quite loose once that the position got opened. And this is one thing that we need to understand very well. And this is the reason why after queen f6, black is losing. There is a chance for white to open up the game, and he seizes that chance. He takes it immediately. And remember the criminal that I was talking about? He goes all the way to a square, but first bishop g4. Give me that rook. Let me make your pieces even further more loose. Apparently the rook cannot go to c5 because there is knight e4, another fork, but it also has to stay on the file to defend this knight on c4. So he played rook c7, and here comes the criminal. He makes his move. He goes d6. Opens up the d5 square, and have a look how loose the black pieces are. The rook on e8 is no longer protected by his brother on c8. That means that black can never capture on d6 with the pawn. But also black has to deal with the threat of knight to b5, knight to d5, and the rook is hanging on c7 right now. So if he takes on d6 with the knight, there comes knight d5. That's a fork, and that's a whole rook up, and that's game over. And if he takes on d6 with the queen, there comes another fork from the other side, knight to b5. And black's problem is not only that he's losing the exchange, he's losing more after, say, queen c6, knight c7, queen c7 on the pen. In order to get rid of it, he will have to give up more and more material. Say b5, queen b5, one pawn down. Now it's a clear extra exchange for white. And on knight e6, just capture on e8, and capture on c7, and capture on e7. Everything disappears, and white is completely winning. So therefore, after d6, he tried the last logical thing. He played rook c6, but this is obviously not helping, not only because of the move bishop d7, which is once again apparently winning a lot of material for white, but even because of the move d7, which was actually played in the game, and this also loses the house for the second player. A possible line would have been rook d8, or rook anywhere, knight d5, and again this is the d5 square that has been cleared by the advance of the d pawn, by the advance of the isolated pawn. There is a lot of energy behind the pieces which are standing and supporting the isolated pawn, and we can see it here clearly. The knight on d5, the rook on e1, even the queen has profited, and the bishop. Each of them, they have profited from the advance of the pawn. And after queen g5, knight e7, check followed by knight c6. Okay, white is simply winning a whole rook, and that will be game over. So the moral of this whole thing that we have seen and this whole story is that no matter how solid your opposition looks like, you always have to be very careful and to watch out for the opponent's activity, especially if they have isolated pawn, and especially if this isolated pawn is kind of blocking their pieces. Watch out for it. It might move, and it may open the squares for the pieces. Thanks for watching this, and see you very soon.